I'll kind of lead up to that, and then I'll flip it over to Monica because she's been leading that charge and doing a great job with it. So she has a lot of insight on that part of it. But we didn't start as a remote company. We had, I mean, Forge3 goes back to 2004. And back then it was a very different kind of company. It was basically just me freelancing with some other freelancers and that sort of thing. But I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, something like that, maybe close to 10 years ago now, I'm not sure. We got some office space, and I met Monica at a Panera Bread of all places through a mutual connection. And we hit it off. I needed some help, and it was me, her, and one or two other people working in a physical office location in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania for 5 years. And then our lease was up after that 5 years, and we said, well, I don't know, we have the technology to work remotely. What if we just did that and see how that would work out? And at that same time, I was reading a lot about other companies, these very successful global $100 million plus companies that were all globally remote. They did not have a physical office location. I said, that's crazy. How does that work? And I remember going to my dad, who is a lifelong insurance guy. He worked at Chubb, a big insurance company, his entire career. He said, what do you mean you're going to go remote? How's that going to work? You can't do that. So it was a great experiment. And we went remote, but we were still located in the same general area around the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania area. And that worked well. And we continue to hire mostly locally to do team days and some other things that Monica can kind of get into. But now that we're all forced to be remote, like we can't get together for team days. We can't get together in the office we have an office presence that we can go into for conference room space and stuff like that. We can't do those things for interview process and whatnot. So it has been challenging because we're adding, as Monica said, 5 people. Percentage-wise, that's a big change of a company. And trying to hire 5 different people across 4 different positions, all doing it remotely through Zoom calls and stuff like that, has been challenging. And that's what Monica is literally in the midst of right now, a majority of her day. So Monica, that's kind of the challenge now, right? Is how do we do that?
Absolutely. We had to change our entire strategy. Well, not the entire strategy, but most of the strategy. Our recruiting process is pretty thorough. We receive usually hundreds, if not thousands of candidates for a position. And if we're hiring multiple positions, that obviously increases. So typically part of that process is just some initial screening questions, some initial screening exercises, just to kind of see how much attention to detail, our candidates are paying attention to. Are they following the instructions properly? We have specific things listed in the job posting that we want them to do. Do they actually do it? And then once they get through that phase, we usually do a phone interview. So that's been kind of standard, business as usual. The hard part for us was the next phase. And the next phase would always be, the second interview would always be with Jeff and myself. We'd meet the candidate in person. So that had to change. Then we would have a team meet and greet, kind of like a shadowing situation. So that had to change. So we have been doing all of that virtually over the last month. And, it's a little tricky. There's some hiccups, but I think it's been working out okay. We had our first team meet and greet yesterday. So we had the whole team on a Zoom call with the candidate. We had some questions prepared just to get to know that person a little better, just to get feedback from our team, on what of that candidate. So I think that was pretty successful. So I think we just need to sort of change our mindset on we could still keep our process and still be thorough. It just is going to have to happen differently than it used to, at least for the time being.
Great points. I think about how our company changed and adapted to this, and I think about many other companies, and whether you're an insurance agency, a white-collar business, manufacturer, whatever it might be, the technology that you currently have directly impacts your ability to work remotely, right? So if you were a company that had all desktops, what was the process of change for you over the past couple of months? I have to tip our hat to our IT staff, because we actually, without a glitch in the system, were able to work remotely just because of the laptops and systems that we have in place. So it's kind of an interesting concept. I don't think everyone's evolved to the point of having even the technology in place that if they had to work remotely, they could even do that. That's a big cost and change in terms of how you operate. So I wanted to ask a quick question as to how do you handle the internal regularity of getting together per se, when it's not a Zoom meeting or just for, building relationships amongst your team itself? How do you guys handle that? And how would you suggest people do that so it doesn't become like another mundane Zoom meeting, like the Zooms after Zooms, So what's a recommendation you might have around a way to make that a little different?
Yeah, that was my concern, and I'll flip it over to Monika again because she's the one that leads that effort. But my concern with going remote initially was that part of it was somebody once told me, actually multiple people told me that you can't have a culture unless you have an office, right? So culture to them equals cool office space with exposed rafters and ductwork and a foosball table, and we're a tech company, so you got to have beer in the fridge and the whole thing. And so I was like, maybe you do have to have a physical office to have a culture. And so I was concerned about that. And so we've implemented a bunch of stuff that Monika can talk through to try to pull the team together. And that's one of the reasons why we still hire mostly local people, because we want to do the things that Monika can kind of talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. We do hire local for that, and hiring local means within a 2-hour maximum driving distance. So we want to make sure that everyone can get here for the day without having to stay overnight anywhere. Because we do several times a month, we do events. So as a team, once a month, we have a team day, and that team day is always something fun. And that could range from going ziplining to going to a spa, to going to board and brush and painting wooden boards, to doing escape rooms as a team. So we're always doing some kind of a team building event. During that team day, we get together in the morning, we grab something to eat for lunch, we go, and it's a full day thing. It's always during the week, and it's always during business hours. And, during that time, the person that handles all of Forge3 operations, support, everything is Jeff. So, it wouldn't be possible, what we're doing wouldn't be possible without the support of Jeff saying, yeah, I'll stay behind and I'll basically be a one-man show so that your team can go ahead and have this day because you really need it and deserve it. So there definitely needs to be some coordination there, and also just support from the top in order for that to be possible, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to take the whole day off and just tell our clients, hey, see you later. We're not available for you anymore. So those are always great. And then we do usually get together once a month just for team meetings to go over some important training things in person. We have ongoing calls all the time to review, any kind of changes or updates. But we do try to get together once a month to do kind of a in-person thing that's a little more in depth, so that we can see each other and just really make sure everybody's learning and everybody's sort of on the same pace. With understanding what might have changed and how it changed and how it impacts their position. But I think the team days is what really kind of connects all of us and allows us to build relationships and friendships on the team, and just get to know each other in a very different way outside of that, work environment.
Yeah, so those are the more regular things that Monika and the team do pretty consistently. And then there are some bigger meetings that will actually fly the folks that aren't around the Lehigh Valley area in for. So the sales team in Columbus, sometimes the person on the West Coast, will fly over and have meetings in person. And those are tend to be bigger meetings with an agenda, and we'll go offsite and we'll get some sort of cool space at like the Glassburn Inn, which is a local kind of cool spot. It sounds like you heard of it, Rob. Like Bear Creek, which is a ski resort place. We've done that before. Those types of things. So those happen throughout the year. We do a big one at the end of the year and kind of celebrate that way. But then the other cool thing that I don't think Monika mentioned was we have milestones too. So when we hit certain milestones as a company, we celebrate as a company, as a team. So the most recent example is when we hit a milestone, I said, we're all going to go somewhere on a trip. So we flew the entire team, even the folks that just joined us, down to Captiva, Florida, which is a little island kind of down South Florida, Southwest Florida. And it was awesome. We rented a nice house right on the water, all kinds of cool stuff to do. The only part that stunk about that was I was super sick. I've never been more sick. I don't think I had the coronavirus, but I did not feel well the entire time. We do those things to celebrate big achievements, and we're already 70+% to our next milestone, which we'll do something similar to that. So sometimes people say, well, you don't have an office. So the reason not to have an office is because you save money. It's not. That has nothing to do with it. In fact, it's probably more expensive to do what we do for not having an office, because you need to pull the culture together and keep the team vibe together, and that sort of thing. It's a really important aspect to it.
Yeah, and I just want to mention one other thing. It goes along with what Jeff just mentioned. I have a budget for my team specifically for those team days each month. So, we don't just kind of figure it out as we go. There's a budget that we set at the end of the year. I know what that budget is, and then I plan what those events are going to be for that year coming up, so I know exactly, how many people I have on my team, what do I have to spend, and that's how that planning goes. So it doesn't have to be, something that's unattainable. Whatever your budget is, if it's smaller or bigger, you just figure out ways to make it work. We've even done team days that cost us absolutely nothing. We've just gone hiking and had a Wawa lunch, that cost less than $100, but it was still a really cool day, a cool experience for the team.
That sounds amazing. That's a really awesome culture. I would have to imagine that this is going to make the level of the people trying to get hired by your company are probably high quality, with knowing how the environment is with you guys. I imagine you're attracting some great talent.
I think that's one of the biggest changes we've seen recently in this round of hiring, is that finding candidates for us has been a lot easier this round. I think people are more aware of Forge3. I think they're more aware of our culture. We have some people who have been following us and have been engaging with us online and social media. So I actually have people emailing in their applications through Indeed, and in their cover letters mentioning, I've been following you guys for a while. I've been waiting for an opportunity to open up so I can apply. That's where that culture comes into play. Sometimes it takes time to build that, but we're at that point now where people are seeking us out.
Culture is so important. It filters down to branding and customer experience, and like Rob mentioned, hiring talent, finding talent. To me, culture is important, and that's one of the things as an for us is so important, and something that we're so protective of. And like Rob mentioned, we really didn't miss a beat with the latest events from COVID-19, and we were fortunate enough to be in a really good position that, hey, everybody has laptops, working remotely, and we didn't miss a beat from the standpoint. But now looking ahead as we move forward, okay, what can we learn and how can we apply that to maybe offering, at this point, we don't have any working remote positions that are full-time, or, there's some folks that have flexibility to work from home as needed, but we're not somebody that has that presently as an offering to employees. So to me, how do we, what are some things that we should consider? Do you have any advice for us as we're, looking at maybe potentially offering this in the future? It's not necessarily, office versus working remote. Neither way is necessarily good or bad. It's just different. So what are some things that maybe we should consider, pros and cons of each? Do you have any insight around that stuff?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I've learned over the last how many years of doing this is that I think it's hard. A company can't treat remote people differently than in-house people, right? You can't have this culture going locally with people in the office talking in the office and then say, oh yeah, but then there's these other people over here. It has to be a top-down, completely permeated through the organization. The tools, the technologies, the workflows, all of that stuff has to be across the board. So as an example, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Zoom and Slack and all these different tools that you can use. But that's a good example. Like if you look at Slack as an example, so Slack, for those of you that don't know, it's like a messaging tool. So you install a little app on your phone, on your computer, whatever, and you can chat. It's like sending text messages almost among the team. And you can do it in groups, in channels, they call it. So we have different channels. We have an announcement channel. So anything important that's going on, we'll put in the announcements channel. There's a kudos channel. So we're fortunate that we get a lot of good kudos and feedback coming in from clients and partners and whatever, and we'll share that stuff constantly. So the point is, you can't just do that for remote people and then have everybody else standing around the physical water cooler in the kitchen and sharing stuff there. It has to be this holistic approach. So even if you're sitting in the physical office, you're still using Slack or whatever the systems you're going to use would be to communicate that. Otherwise, you're creating this rift, this separation among the team, which is the last thing you want to do. So that's just one example, I think, of it. It's really hard to bolt on remote. You have to think about the company in general holistically and then say, well, how are we going to do this internally? And then who cares? If there's 1 or 5 or 90% of the team is remote, nothing changes. We still do it the same way. They're just sitting somewhere physically different that day. So I think that's a really important piece. And a lot of companies now, especially, are being forced into this remote world. And some of them are like you guys are awesome because you're like, we didn't miss a beat. A lot of companies miss some beats, and they're still missing beats because they can't get into their computer and they have to remote desktop in and they can't print, and then it's a whole thing.
Right.
It's kind of case in point of what I'm talking about.
Jeff, I don't want to call this a con, but I think we talked about this a little bit before the webinar began. We chuckle around the Zoom meetings and the social media posts where man or the woman's on a meeting and you see the kid coming in the background and getting dragged out of their office by the mother or something like that. You know, is that really is that a con, or is that just something that I think that people are more going to be accepting to? Like, we're all human beings, we're all in this together. This is going to be an acceptable way of life. Like the stringent formality is kind of, that barrier is broken down a little bit.
I've always been a big fan. I mean, anybody that's followed me for any length of time knows that I've always been a fan of the human side of business. That's what it is. My dad always said it's all about relationships. That's true.
Yes, it is.
Whether you're remote or not remote or local or not local, it doesn't matter. It's people want to do business with people, and preferably people that they like, that they trust, and that they can relate to. So now everyone's on the same playing field. Like, watch the Today Show and Al Roker is broadcasting the weather from his kitchen table, just like we are right now. Like, we're all the same. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's a great opportunity to humanize the business. And that's, a lot of the big companies can't do that. Amazon is not going to personalize their business model. You have these opportunities, I think, now, and it makes us approachable as people, as business people, but just as regular people as well. So yeah, I mean, my kids, if you've been on any of the webinars that we've done, sometimes before we start, the kids are in here and I'll say, here's Connor and here's Ella, and they're saying hi to everybody. And most people have kids. Like, are we going to hide the kids, like, and not talk about kids and family? Like, that's, we're all in the same boat. So I don't know. I skew in that direction though, naturally, because I just naturally enjoy seeing other people do that. It may not work for everybody, but I think it's a great opportunity to get personal.
I love that. Having the personal aspect of anything, like you said, it's all about relationships in any business, especially on our side in the insurance business. It's all about relationship. I know one of the things that I wrestle with in my head is I love being with people and being out in front of folks and interacting. And something of late I've been struggling with is talking to a computer screen all the time or talking on the phone. I certainly love that, don't get me wrong, but to me it was a really, and I'm just digressing a little bit, but to me it was a real big flip too much in one direction. So I'm curious to see how that'll balance back in the future for someone like myself who's out on the road and interacting with clients and seeing their facilities and so forth. I mean, that's something that will be interesting as it evolves.
Yeah, and that's a great point, John. And that's the reason why we have a physical office location in Columbus, is for that reason. Zach, Kenny, and the sales team want to be in the same place. There's a certain vibe, a certain energy that you get. They want to have the bell. They want to have the basketball hoop on the wall. That's the vibe that they want to create. Cool. And that's where I think, you have to recognize the needs of the business and the needs of the people within the business, and then try to play to the strong suits of that. So, and also when we're hiring, it's an advantage for us to know, and for people that are interested in working with us, that we are remote first. So it's kind of a self-selecting pool at that point, because one of the first questions, Monika, that we ask is, you're aware that this is how we work. This is how we do this. Here are all the benefits and the fringe benefits and the trips and all the fun stuff that we do. But we don't do that all the time, right? Like most days we're doing this kind of work remotely. Yes, you can go to coffee shops. Yes, you can go different places. Yes, we get together, but this is remote first. So we're selecting people, and people are selecting us that want to work in that environment. And that's been topic of conversation, Monika, during the hiring process. And that's why we do shadowing and that sort of thing.
That's a great point about the sales environment. To me, that is culture, and that's the vibe and the energy. That's something I know I personally feed off of, and I think the team really feed off of. So that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah. And on top of that, just working remotely doesn't mean you always have to be working in the same place. So that flexibility of what you want your environment to be is up to you. And I think that helps tremendously. So for us, for my production team, there's many times that we get together in very small groups. I might get together with our lead visual designer because I want to do, we want to talk through strategy on something, but we don't want to do it on the phone or on a Zoom meeting. So we'll get together at Whole Foods, have a coffee, and chat for half a day. Sometimes we'll get together with the 3 or 4 of us, so we roam around Paneras and Starbuckses and, Whole Foods and college campuses. We just kind of pick a place that we think we want to be at for that day. And it might be half a day or full day. And we get together in those small groups if we want to see someone or just work with someone. We do that pretty frequently during non-COVID times, but and that really works too. I think there's where you have that human element, and you can get away from that Zoom screen and that Slack channel and just really have that in-person interaction.
Yeah. Well, being that we're an insurance agency and risk management professionals, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how this new way of working remotely, cyber attacks and things like that are very prominent right now, more than ever, and they have been trending this direction even before COVID-19. So how are you guys managing this exposure? Is there anything that you do that you can recommend people do other than having the proper, software backup system? So what are your thoughts on that piece of this?
So in our case, most of the stuff is in the cloud natively. So that was a shift that we made. When we had an office, we had a little server in the office, and we don't have any servers anymore. So we use Google G Suite and a bunch of other online services and whatnot. So from a like a disaster recovery standpoint and a continuity standpoint and that sort of thing, that's less of an issue for us because of that.
Sure.
Not all companies can do that, but most can. So if you can, that's a great way to do it. But yeah, working remotely, it opens up there are cons. Working remotely is not this utopia. There are issues that you have to work against. And on the security side, to your question, for example, if you're in a coffee shop or an airport and you're jumping onto Wi-Fi, that's inherently dangerous. Like, most people don't realize that that's not a safe thing to do. People can sit there right next to you and snoop on the traffic, and they can get passwords and all this stuff out of the air. So one of the things that we do with every single person on the team is we all have a VPN account. So we use a platform called expressvpn.com. And that connection then is secure. So if we do jump on a public Wi-Fi, we make sure that we're using the VPN so everything's encrypted. So that's a really simple thing that everybody should be doing. If you're not doing that, then maybe tether to your phone, to your cell phone or something like that, which is more secure than public Wi-Fi. So these are kind of best practices that we have in our playbook on how we operate. Other things are, we have a password management system. We use onepassword.com again. So there are these secure vaults, because you can imagine the business that we're in. We have 1,000 different clients across the country, and we have to manage sensitive information for those clients. But we don't just like stick it on a sticky note and put it on our computer. It's in a vault system, which is all, again, encrypted. There you go, John. So that's another
Look that up.
that's another example of something that we use. And then there are other, they're just best practices things to do. Like with passwords, we make sure that we have two-factor authentication turned on. Sometimes it'll be called 2FA, or different companies have different names for it. But basically, I'm sure some of you have seen this, where you log into a site and it says, well, we sent you a text message code. You got to type in the code. Well, that's important, because if a hacker gets in somehow to these systems, because remember, all of our stuff is in the cloud, we have to protect that. So we enforce two-factor across the entire team, so that even if you, Rob or John or somebody, got the password to my account, you still wouldn't be able to get in because you don't have my cell phone or my authenticator app or whatever. So, so there are, it's kind of best practices things that we just implement. And it's a lot of education across the team. That's a lot of our onboarding, how we train folks, new folks. And we make sure that we just kind of do what makes sense to protect not only our data, but also the client's data and all of that. Yeah, it's a great concern, though. It's a great question.
Those are some really valuable resources there. I've got a bunch of notes here, some things for us to follow up on. So
yep.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
John, you want to go to the next question?
Sure. And maybe just to put a button on that with the cyber attacks and stuff. Rob, are there things that clients or even businesses can do from an insurance standpoint to protect themselves should the worst case scenario happen with a hacker or extortion or social engineering fraud? Are those things that folks can purchase an insurance policy for, and what does that process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's kind of a loaded question in some ways, because cyber insurance is a very large, generalized term, but the subtext of actual coverages, there's a lot that goes into that. And the other thing that we talk about oftentimes is that insurance is only one mechanism, right? So risk management is another mechanism, and it gets back to some of the things that Jeff mentioned with, the best practices, the authentication. So anything that we recommend to a client is you have to have policies and procedures to protect yourself. The insurance is just there when you have either a financial loss or a loss associated to it, to sort of keep you whole again. So there are insurance products for almost everything, and they continue to adapt the cyber insurance products for social engineering, phishing, whatever it might be. But 20 years ago, the product didn't exist, and it was just evolving because the exposure continued to arise. So, I would say that there's definitely insurance products, and a lot of people do not have the coverage that they need, or they may not have enough coverage. So it's definitely something worth exploring. But the most important piece of that is, how does the insurance product fit in with what security structures the organization has, right? Because we can only make you whole again if you have the proper infrastructure to kind of protect yourself to some degree. If you lose everything.
Ron, to that point, just like anything, you don't want insurance to be the first avenue. The first thing you want to try and do is either avoid the risk or transfer risk, or just, hey, know it's there. And so just like anything insurance related, that to me, insurance is just for the catastrophic. So worst case, the system gets hacked, you lose thousands of dollars, or a payroll system gets hacked, something of that nature. It's for the catastrophic. And so, like,
absolutely,
you want to try and do everything, have processes, procedures in place, firewalls, all that good stuff that Jeff was mentioning. To me, that's really important to do in the front end, so you don't really have to use your insurance policy unless it's a huge loss. So
absolutely, I think statistically, just like identity theft, it's not, if it's going to happen to you, it's going to happen to everybody at some point in their lifetime now. I think the same thing comes to the business aspect, where there's going to be some type of cyber breach or issue, or try to, get into your email system. So again, I would say that, everybody has a need. So, obviously an insurance product is only one piece of the equation, but having the right policies and procedures is probably the most important piece of it. So good points. Thanks for all your input on that.
So I'll open this question up to everybody, because we have these concerns and things that we have to work with. But what are some ways that as leaders we can track and monitor and work with our team to ensure things are being done. I'm very much somebody that doesn't like to micromanage. It's not something that I will lean towards, but what are some things as leaders that we should do, or what are some helpful tips that you folks have?
So that was the number 2 question that I heard most often when we said we're not going to have the office anymore. It was, well, what about the culture? And then how are you going to make sure people are doing stuff?
Right.
How do you, productivity is going to fall off a cliff. How are you going to know? You're not going to be able to see them 9 to 5. Our business is a little bit different, right, Monika, in that there's a production process. But I think that any company, if you have the right structure and the right goals and the right workflows, and it requires you, I would say going remote requires you to be more diligent as a company. Because when you're in an office environment, it's real easy to kind of get a little sloppy and just say, oh, you know what, that thing, hey, Monika, can you come over here real quick? I just want to show you this thing. And there's a lot of that sloppiness that just happens in corporations. I worked at big companies, small companies, my own company, and you just see that happening. Whereas Monika, now, it almost being remote forces you to look at the company more closely. I don't know what the right word is for that. But like now everything's a process and a workflow, and how do you make it efficient? And if we see things pop up consistently, well, why is that? And everything's tied back to like, are we getting this stuff done? I don't know, Monika, if that's something that you've noticed as well, but.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot more transparency, that we've built in too. So for example, back in the day when I was in a regular office working for a different company, I mean, I don't know how many times I heard I didn't get that email, or something along those lines, right? I mean, it's like the typical, oh, nope, didn't get that email, never saw that. So we have a system called Front, where all client communication feeds through. So everyone has visibility into that. So any message coming in from a client goes to our Front system, into our team at Forge3.com inbox, and then it gets assigned out to a specific person based on what needs to happen. So we don't have situations where we didn't get that email. And if we didn't get that email, it's probably an issue somewhere that's a bigger issue, like maybe it ended up in spam, or maybe somehow it just got completely rejected from that main inbox. So I think just having a lot more transparency and visibility, it could feel sometimes like micromanagement, especially at the beginning. It almost feels like, Big Brother's watching. But I think as long as you can explain to the team, and the team understands the reason, the purpose behind why we do it this way, that mindset changes pretty quickly. Because the reason why isn't because we want to watch every minute of the day what you're doing. The reason why is because we just want to make sure that we service our clients, and that they're always wowed by our level of service and response time, and that we all kind of can learn from things, not because we want to watch what you're doing every minute of the day. Quite honestly, I don't know what my people are doing every minute of the day. For all I know, they might be watching TV, and working, I don't know, around it, but it doesn't matter, because their work is done. Our clients are happy. We have visibility into that because we constantly get feedback from clients. I don't see any complaints from team members who, keep each other accountable. So as far as I know, you could be at the beach working on a beach chair, watching the ocean, but as long as you're getting your work done, it's fine. I'm happy. So.
Monika, how do you, and not to get off top, but how do you get feedback from clients? What are some ways that you guys do that? Do you use Google reviews? Do you constantly what kind of things do you do?
Yeah, in so many different ways. Well, for one, every one of us in our email signature has a little link at the bottom of our signature that says, how am I doing? So if you're interacting with anyone on our team, it could be Jeff, it could be me, it could be, our client experience manager, there's always an opportunity to provide feedback on that interaction. And that's just a form on our website that someone can fill out, and give us that feedback. Anytime we've, it's actually been great. I mean, we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from our clients just through that tool. Anytime we launch a project, a website, Jeff checks in with each one of those projects and asks them for their feedback. Usually that's a link to a form, that they could fill out their feedback, and then he follows up on it. So whatever the feedback is, Jeff will always follow up personally. It's not an automated thing. It's something he does manually. So we just, we really make an effort to make sure that we know what's happening and that we keep a pulse on it. Jeff, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, but that's that human element that we were talking about before, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we get as much feedback as we do is because of what Monika just mentioned. It's, yes, there's a link on the email signatures and we get feedback that way, which is great. But it's that personal outreach that comes from me after a project.
Mm-hmm.
Clients are not expecting that. Just like they're not expecting me to send a handwritten card after they sign up with us. That's a surprise too. These little wow factors. So technology is there to help, but in my mind, it never replaces us as people. So the sweet spot is, how do you take the technology and merge it with the human element? So the human element in this case is me personally reaching out. And then if they provide feedback, I will then personally reach out again. I'll reply to it and I'll say, hey, by the way, thank you so much. Bethany on the team is blushing because you said great stuff about her. I'm going to make sure that we share that with her. By the way, if you wouldn't mind, here's a link to Google. Here's a link to Facebook. If you want to give us stars there, that's great. You don't have to, but would appreciate it. And that magic potion of tech plus human is where that sweet spot is. And just going back to the productivity thing, I'll give you a little snippet of a look kind of behind the scenes with, I have a buddy in New Jersey who has a couple of Allstate agencies. And he said that, they were forced to work remotely, just like everybody else. And he's having, last month was the best production month on record. Why? He doesn't know exactly. It's almost like the team is trying to prove that they're able to work remotely. And, if you were looking at a sales team, well, sales teams are easy to quantify. What are the goals that you're trying to hit? Who cares where people are or how they're doing it? I mean, as long as it's ethical and it carries the company policies forward and all that kind of stuff. But it kind of doesn't matter, right? So that's interesting. So they went remote for a couple of months and all of a sudden sales are off the charts. Why is that? There's
Absolutely.
something there.
So distractions there.
Yeah.
I have, just a quick example. One of my, our client experience manager was visiting her parents last week in the Poconos. So this is about an hour and a half drive, from the Lehigh Valley. She spent 2 hours working from her car. Nothing, I mean, there was no visible downside to that. She was just as efficient, just as responsive to our clients, was handling everything the way it needed to be handled, but she was tethered to her phone while her husband was driving, responding to our client requests from the car. So, do I care that she's in the car? Not really, because she's still focused on getting things done, like it needs to get done, but she has that flexibility to do it from wherever she is.
These are some great stories. We had a webinar a few weeks back with a gentleman, Ed Easterly, who's a labor attorney. And one of the topics of conversation around that was, so if I'm a business and then I want to implement this work from home structure, that our recommendation is that you actually have a policy or, an outline of what the expectations are and things like that. Do you guys have any recommendations around what that looks like? Obviously you can manage production in some way, but is there a way to implement a policy? Is there something that you have other than a best practices way of doing things? Just looking for some recommendations for people that may want to implement something.
So I think there are two pieces of it. I think there's the company-wide policies on how do you use the tools, because that's something that we struggled with early on, and it's never perfect. I always say progress is perfection. As long as we're making progress, great. Like, we're never going to get to perfect. But like an example is, how do we use the different tools that we have at our disposal, like notifications? If you have notifications turned on for all the different tools that we use, you're going to get notified to death. There's going to be ding, ding, ding. And you're like, what do I need? Do I worry about that one? Jeff said something. Do I have to worry about that right now? Or what do I do? So I think the company policies on how do you use the tools is always something that should come at a company level. And that's just one quick example. And then obviously you have the individuals on the team. So their goals and how you expect them to work is obviously dependent upon their responsibilities, their job, who they report to, their interaction with clients, that sort of thing. So I think there's kind of two ways to look at it. And, in our case, we have a lot of, we basically have sales, production, which is building websites, and then we have post-launch support. Those are the kind of the big pieces of the company. And technology is in there as well. So how do we do the production side? Well, production side is easy because we know that certain people have to produce certain things. So for those specific positions, you can quantify it. They're not sales positions, but we have to get a certain amount of work done to make the machine run. The vague area is probably more on the post-launch support because we have little control over when clients need us. And that really comes down to those reports, those surveys that Monika was talking about. Are people happy? Are we getting back to people quickly? If somebody emails us and it takes us 4 days to say hello, well, something's broken. We either need a lot more people or something else is going on. So those analytics, again, it's going to be dependent upon the company, and that's the hard thing. So in the case of what you were talking about with the client, it's hard to know exactly because you really have to, that's what I was saying before, you have to, it forces you to look at the company at a macro and micro level differently because you have to look at these things and say, well, what makes that role successful? Whereas if you're in an office, you're like, well, everyone's here. Everyone's smiling. They seem happy. I don't know, 9 to 5. And, Johnny stays until 5:30. So he's working hard. You get a little bit of a loosey-goosey feel with that where it's not as analytical and as strict. And so it's a good practice, even if you're not going to go remote at all. Like, to me, it's just good business practice. The stuff that we've been implementing over the last, 4 or 5 years, whenever we did this, Monika. Even if we went back to an office, which we have no plans of doing, the same things would still apply.
Yeah, it's building in that accountability and, being able to measure what's happening. I mean, we have insight into how long it takes for us to respond to messages. We have insight into how many messages it takes to close out that specific task. We have insight into how often the phone is answered and who answers it, and so we have all of those metrics. If we identify there's a problem, we can start investigating, like, what is the root of that problem, and figure out ways to do something about it. But there was a question about, do we have any sort of a policy listed? We do have an sort of an intranet site where we do list our policies in terms of what flexibility means, in terms of what remote working means. For example, one of the policies is you could work from anywhere and be remote, but you have to have a good internet connection. You have to be available. You have to be in a place that's conducive to business, because you have to answer the phone if it rings. And if a client wants to get on a phone call that's not scheduled, you need to be available during those business hours. So, if you're in a really noisy place trying to get your job done that day, you either need to let us know that you're taking advantage of some flexibility and you may not always be available throughout the day, or you can't do it because that's disruptive to our business. So there are some policies in place to make sure that we're all contributing and we're all accountable.
And I would say above everything else, though, we're a team. It's like we're on the field at the same time, and like you feel a certain accountability. It's just human nature. You want to find people to put onto the team that understand the value of that, and it doesn't really matter at that point if you're tracking this or tracking that or this metric or that metric. If, like, I rode crew boats in college, if there's a boat of 8 guys rowing and the third guy back is not rowing as hard as everybody else, the whole boat gets screwed up. You can't row. It's tipping over and the water's coming in and you're barely making it straight. And it's the same kind of thing. So above all else, that is a really important factor. It's this accountability and I think that's why my buddy in New Jersey is seeing the production increase, because people are like, I want to row harder now because I appreciate this. I don't want to let anybody else down. I like this. So how do we do this more? Well, I'm going to make sure that I work as hard as I can because I think my colleagues are. I don't want to be the one that screws this up.
Sure.
Right.
So the other side of this that we don't like to talk as much about it, but what kind of advice do you have for us of folks that may, I don't want to say taking advantage, but it's not for them, or they're not adjusting, or you kind of know that they're not pulling their weight? What kind of advice do you have around that on how how to manage that and coach them on those things?
That's a good question. We haven't had that happen really, have we, Monica?
Yeah, not too many instances. I mean, I would say you just have to be diligent at keeping close tabs on what's happening. So, I really do think it starts with hiring. I think if you have a really solid hiring process, you're going to find the right people that fit into your culture in your company. And our hiring process is so specific and so different than anything else I've ever seen. I think that's a huge contributor to why we have so much success. We really make our candidates work in order to work here. We don't ask them to do anything crazy, but we definitely ask them to do a few things, and that helps us determine if they are team players, if they are willing to go that extra mile in order to get an interview. How do they handle that initial interaction? That's very telling for us. I think the other thing that we do well is, we keep tabs on what's happening during that initial period. That first 3 months is critical. We make sure that we set them up for success. We don't just bring them into Forge3 and just hope that they survive. We have a whole training program that's lasts for months to ensure that this person's going to be successful. They have a mentor. There's a program they go through. We make sure that they are that we're scaling their workload properly, that we're not just dumping things on them because we need to get it off somebody else's plate, that's actually tiered in a way that's manageable, that enables them to learn. The team is willing to offer help whenever that person needs it. So there's never that feeling of, oh my goodness, I don't want to ask another question because they think I'm an idiot. That never happens at Forge3. We're all willing and ready to help during those initial months. We have a 3-month review process that we go through to ensure that we check in with that person. We evaluate their performance. They evaluate us, and whether or not they're happy in that position. And then that process continues, through that first year of just checking in, keeping close tabs, and rolls into that annual review. So I think all of those things really contribute to ensuring that we're setting someone up for success. And I think also for Jeff and I, we usually tend to look at it like it's not really the person's fault. It's probably our fault. Like if something's not working, it's probably a process situation. Maybe we don't have the right process in place. Maybe we're not providing the right training or the right support or the right tools. So we tend to look in that direction first before we say that person's not working out,
That's helpful. Thank you. I wanted a quick jump back because I had a comment on the work from home policy from a company structure, and I'll be the insurance guy for this question or position. So I think some of the insurance industry and maybe the legal aspect of understanding exactly what the expectations are, having a work from home policy looks like. Just to give an example, if you don't know where somebody's at or when they're quote unquote working versus when they're not working, there's an insurance risk and exposure. So, from a workers' compensation standpoint, part of the definition is during the course and scope of your employment, right? So if an injury happens while someone's in their home office, they trip over a printer and, break their ankle, whatever example might be. It's kind of an insurance nightmare in some ways to figure out, okay, this just happened because the person tripped, or was it related to their job per se? So it may sound, really crazy, that idea and concept of it, but it really is a thing that businesses need to think about, entertain, and I think how that work from home policy, some of the things that Monika, that you mentioned, that you have in place, that's going to be a key component to that. So an employee knows where they stand, where they're protected. And then from an employer standpoint, if something's not related to work, the insurance shouldn't be covering that as well. So kind of a vague area, I think. I think that's going to be a tough area for anyone to really kind of put their finger on that exposure and be able to control that. But just to get, Monika, to your example with the woman that was driving to the Poconos, right? So they got into a car accident. Was she working while she was in a car accident? Would that be considered a workers' compensation claim? Yep. I don't know. It's a very, very, vague scenario. But these are the types of things that, as our world adapts, the insurance industry will have to adapt to addressing situations like that. So I'm just bringing that up. It's a little insurance jargon along with this whole.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, it's a great point, Rob. Even the cyber, we have cyber liability protection, obviously. As you mentioned, most businesses should have it these days. So if your business doesn't have it, look into that for sure. I've even noticed that the language of a lot of those policies, it's hard. I mean, technology moves so quickly that, and the exposures change so quickly. There's always going to be this vagueness in some areas. Hopefully, it doesn't prevent companies like ours or anybody else's from moving things forward and doing what's best for the company and all of that. But there's going to be kind of a vagueness, I think, and an uncertainty for some of the pieces of this.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Good. Let's see how much time we got. We've got about 7 more minutes yet. Is there any, I guess, going through the list of questions that we had, I think we hit on a lot of topics. The conversation and dialogue was really good today. Are there any other areas or tips that you might have for companies looking to start to do this remotely? I mean, I think we talked about culture, the interviewing process. I think you're kind of hitting on a lot of those topics. Is there any other recommendations that you would make if you're a company looking to be a remote business?
I mean, like I said before, I think the biggest thing is to start at the company level. And again, it's not one of those things that you can like bolt on. Like, well, we have our team of 15 in the office, but we're going to hire Jane and she's going to work remotely and we're going to see how that works out. That's not how it works. Like, you just can't do it that way. So I think the first place to start is to say, yes, you know what, this is an important component of our business for the long term, for the future. Okay. So what does that mean then for your company, for what you do? Is it a product business? Is it a service business? What is it? Manufacturing? Is it professional services? Different businesses are going to have a very different model on how to make that work, but it's got to start from the very top and go through the entire organization. You can't just have some department trying it or experimenting with it. It doesn't really work like that. It's okay to experiment with tools. We did a lot of that, Monica. I remember I used to switch tools on us constantly back in the day because we were trying to find, well, that doesn't work right. And nah, it doesn't work right either. And we're trying to solve this problem, but that tool does us kind of it, but doesn't do the whole thing. Maybe there's a better option. And so it's okay to do that internally. But I think you do it from a holistic view. So I think for most companies that haven't gotten into this yet, or they're just now being forced into it, a lot of them are trying to figure this out on the fly. It's like changing the wheel as you're driving down the highway. It's hard to do. But if you really take a step back and you look at it and you want to implement this long term, it starts there. You just have to sit back and say, all right, well, what tools do we need? What are our challenges? What are the problems we need to solve by doing this? And then look at the tools, the technology, whatever. I always say it's the team is first. So what do you need to make this work? The right team, 100%. That's like the answer for everything in business in my mind, is you have to have the right people go in the boat. If you don't, nothing else is going to work. It doesn't matter what tools you have or what trips you go on, none of that stuff matters if you don't have the right team. So the team is really important, obviously. But they need to have the right tools in place and then the right processes in place. So those 3 components together are what make this work. And you need to look at it holistically across those 3 different disciplines.
And then just for me to add, for me, I always look at the upside. I mean, there's always going to be challenges, but for me, the upside is that I can tap into so many different candidates because we have that opportunity for people to work from home and to have some flexibility built into their day. So, working moms, for example, I'm one of them. And for me, I honestly don't know, with my kids being one of them in high school and another one in elementary school, both very involved with athletics and activities, I don't know how I would be able to work in a job where I had to go into an office and be there from 8 to 5 or 6 every day. It wouldn't work because I want to see my kids' basketball game and I want to take them to practice, and sometimes I have to drive them in the middle of the day to, to some kind of an event. It just allows me to do that, but I could still be a really great employee and very accessible, and it doesn't affect my work, So I think just the upside for me in who I'm able to hire, whether it's a working dad or working mom, and giving them that opportunity and flexibility is huge. It opens up the candidate pool quite a bit for us.
It's cool.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any extra questions here today, but I think we got a lot of great information, great conversation, some very useful information for anybody who's looking to run a remote business. We appreciate the opportunity to have you guys on here today, and we'll share this with all of our customers and prospective clients. And I'm assuming that we'll share everyone's contact information in case anybody wants to inquire with you around getting some more professional advice to utilize you as a vendor. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank
This was
you.
great.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having us.